Okay.
Yeah.
Is it all going to go quiet now?
Yeah, we need some quiet. Well,
There's no door to close here.
Right guys, we're just starting filming now, so keep the noise to the...
Yeah, I'm going anyway. Yeah, I'm going.
Cheers.
And then everyone else is
Thanks
making
a
that.
lot.
So I'll give you a call and then you...
Are you doing Stella's story from Coventry as well?
I think we're trying to do two ladies from Coventry.
Yeah, Stella's been after she got married. She didn't grow up
She came here after she got married.
married.
Okay, I
Yes.
think she's on the list of people
Yes.
to try and do.
It's good to differ different.
We're trying to get as many
Yeah.
different perspectives of
Yes.
how people came over.
Yes.
Trying to speak to Mathea Banayoda, who lives, got the Northfield chip shop. Do you know her, Banayoda?
I don't know her, but I know the Northfield on the Bristol
Yeah.
one. Yes.
So they've got that, and that's my yaya's sister.
Mm.
She came here when she was 14, and she got married at 16. So I'm going
Right.
to interview her next week.
Right.
She's the one that lost it. Probably she lost her son when he was about 33.
Oh, that
Kiri.
Banayoda. I know
Yeah.
Banayoda. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's my mum's sister, my yaya's sister. So we're going to do her as well. And my mum's going to be in it, but only with her sisters. Okay.
Right.
So,
You
forget the cameras, just talk to me like we're having a conversation.
okay?
Just start off by telling me your name and a little bit about your parents.
Right. My name now is Maria Xenidis, but my maiden name was Maria Angelidis in English. My parents arrived in England during the 30s, mid-30s I think. I haven't got exact dates. And my parents and other Greek Cypriots who were around at that time, the way they made their living was selling the Lefkara lace, which was somehow got the fame in England as well. And they were going from door to door with a suitcase on buses, nobody drove, and trying to sell this Lefkara lace, and somehow they made a living. My father, because in his youth he'd been to America, worked in catering, and he was more world-wise than most of them, he bought a big rented a big Victorian mansion in Buccleuch Street in Glasgow, and filled it up with tenants. It was mainly his friends, his Greek Cypriot friends, who were here either unmarried or had left their wives back home. And he rented rooms to them, and it was bed and dinner, breakfast, an evening meal and whatever. My mother took charge of that. And this is how they managed to make a living for those few years. Which was pre-war, before 1939 when the World War started.
How did people hear about your father and mother, and
How did people...
hear about what they were doing? How did they get in touch?
You mean in the people in Cyprus?
Yeah.
I think there was, before the war, there was the letter writing. You could correspond with your family. And out of the two of them, my mother, they both went to junior school for a few years only, but my mother seemed to be more articulate with reading and writing than my father, so she kept in touch.
And tell us a little bit more about they have a business for very long. What happened after that?
Well, I omitted to tell you that my older brother was with them, who was about 6 or 7 when they arrived. And after a few years, I'm a little bit vague about the years, when World War II was starting in 1939, and everybody that could afford a ticket on the boat would go back to Cyprus, because it was then known that England would lose the war and Germany would take the world at the time. So everybody who could afford their ticket back went back to Cyprus. Now my father's brother and sister, who were also here, were getting ready to go, But my parents, which they could not afford to go, and my mother was pregnant with me at the same time, they sent my brother back home with his uncles and auntie. So after that, they didn't see him for 8 years. The war lasted, I think, 6. And then they
said goodbye to their son?
They said goodbye to their son, yes.
Gosh, that's been really
It was very traumatic, I think, for my mother. But, you know, with a baby on the way,
You did what you had to do.
yes, yes.
So did she speak to them often, or how did you communicate with your brother? Or?
I used to hear, when I started understanding, by the time I was able to record things in my brain, we had moved to Birmingham. Because there was no work, you couldn't go around selling expensive Cyprus lace to people during war years. So one by one the Cypriots went to other cities. And my father's best friend, who is now my godfather, came to Birmingham. And he found work in the car factory, which was called at the time the Austin factory, and wrote to my father and said, you can get a job at the factory if you get your family and come. So they arrived by train to Birmingham.
So they weren't affected by the war in terms of losing their homes in Glasgow?
No, I don't think I don't know when it was, when the bombing was strong, but I think at the beginning of the war, there didn't seem to be any bombing around. They came by train, and my father again found an old Victorian house in Persia Road and rented it. He rented the whole house, and he did what he did in Glasgow. He had friends, mainly friends and people he knew, and rented rooms.
And how old were you at the time?
I must have been about 2 or 3 when we came, and when we left I was 6. So that's when my brain recorded stories around me. I remember my mum talking about a brother, which I didn't know what a brother was, and I had to mention him in my prayers. And, sorry.
It's okay. Take your time. Yeah. What was your brother called?
Nikos Angelidis. I think some of the older people in Birmingham would know him.
When did you see your brother again?
When I was 6, in 1946. The war had ended, and we went with a big ship which was traveling to India, and it stopped in Egypt. Mother, father and me, we traveled, and I do remember that. I remember it well because Mother and I had to share a cabin with some nuns. And I remember my mother wanting to see them after they took the habit from the head, to see whether they had shaved their heads, and she kept on and on to my father about this. And I remember the trip, and I remember Egypt. We arrived there, and these men in big white...
Hello?
Good morning.
My name's Marina. Got a dog?
He's
That's
not...
all right. We're going to edit this, don't worry.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to stay there, that's
Oh.
okay. It's okay, isn't it? Yeah, it's fine. Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, it's comfortable.
He's comfortable. So
No, that's fine.
If you want me to get them out, I will.
No, it's
Okay.
quite nice, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So just take me back to that journey.
That journey.
Where were you heading to, sorry, to get your brother?
To get to Cyprus, we had to go to Egypt, because this big cruise liner could not go in Cyprus waters because they were too shallow. The Cyprus now, you know how the beaches are very shallow. You'd have to stop far out of Cyprus and come by a smaller boat into the port. I think it was in Varosha. Varosha was the biggest one of the ports at the time, Famagusta. And they arrived in Egypt, where we had to stay for 3 days until a smaller boat picked us up and took us to Cyprus. There were smaller boats traveling from Egypt to Cyprus back and forth, and that's how we went to Cyprus. But I remember Egypt a little bit because there were many big white kaftans, they call them kaftans, chasing after my father for bakshish. Bakshish meant they were beggars, and I remember that. And then the other thing I remember was the market full of mandarin oranges, because it was April. And the smell, I had never smelled anything like it. It was beautiful. And my father bought loads and loads, and we went back to the hotel and we made pigs of ourselves. Bear in mind, I'd never tasted a mandarin before in my life.
So, did you have much money? How much did that cost to get there? Do you know?
I don't know, but my father, I don't know whether you want to edit, because I didn't think I'd finished from England. Can I go back to that?
Yeah, of course. We're going to edit this.
Yeah. After he worked a couple of years in the car factory, and my godfather, who they were friends, they saved money and they bought their first fish and chip shop in Balsall Heath. And
so were they running the chip shop at the time?
they were running the chip shop for a year or so and got enough money, and my father bought the international restaurant sometime in the early 40s, during the war.
Okay,
and
so this journey happened in between that time because you just wanted to go and get your brother and bring him home?
No. As I said, I didn't finish that Birmingham story, and then I jumped on to the boat in Cyprus. So can I go back to Birmingham? That's Birmingham when we arrived. So his first business was the fish and chip shop, and it was a little rough in that area, and they used to have battles with customers at night who buy fish and chips and they wouldn't pay. So there were wars between the men. I think there was a few scrabbles with Irishmen who used to come in after the pub to get fish and chips, and I remember them talking about it. And I remember my godfather saying to my mom, "You should have interfered because this woman was hitting him and he didn't want to hit a woman." And my godfather said, "Why didn't you come and rescue me?" And Mom said to him, "Well, what about if she found me the next day taking the baby in a pram, taking the baby in a pram, and she attacked me? So that's why she wouldn't help him."
So did your mum work in the chip shop as well?
Well, she used to go visiting with me in the pushchair. It wasn't very...
far?
No, Persia Road and Balsall Heath is more or less... You could cut across the park.
And then what happened after?
Afterwards, when they saved money, my father bought the international restaurant, and my godfather bought another restaurant. It was in Dale End somewhere. I think it was called the Olympia. And that made a big success of that. It was during the war years, and there were American bases somewhere near Birmingham. And every lunchtime the place filled with Yanks. And that made great friends with, he picked out, or they picked him, the American Yanks, people who were Greek, not the American Yanks. I'm sorry, you have to edit this.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
The
Greek Yanks.
The Greek Yanks with uniforms, war uniforms. He made great friends with them. And they were asking him about Greek church. And my father, and that is the very first church in Birmingham, my father asked around, and in Persia Road, a little bit further away from our house, there was an Anglican church, St. Andrew's, which is still there now. in Pershore Road. And my father asked the bishop, the Archbishop in London, can we have a priest sent to Birmingham? And he said, you can have him once a month. And once a month we went to church very near our home, and all the Greek Cypriots that were in Birmingham at the time came, plus the Greek youngs came.
How old were you then?
I remember that well, and I don't know if in the photographs there's anything, but I must have been 3 or 4.
So you
I
went
do.
to a monthly church. Your dad created a monthly church.
A monthly church, yes.
Okay. And how many Greeks would you say there were in Birmingham at the time?
I don't know.
Numbers.
I would think it would be from 60 downwards, something like that.
And were a lot from the village because of the lace?
No, there weren't many. They were the people who went back. We didn't have anybody else from our village. They were the Greek Cypriot friends he made at the time. The only other Greek lady, which I vaguely remember, was Spirou. Do you remember Spirou? Her husband was George from Azodon. He died many years ago.
Okay, I'm not sure. So then how long did your father have the international restaurant for, and what? Runa was telling me some stories about, but did you not work in it, but you used to visit?
That was later. Now, in 1946, when the war ended, that was when we went to Cyprus by boat.
Oh, to your brother. Were
So-
you scared at all during the war times? or-
Sorry?
Were you scared at all during the war times, or?
I wasn't scared of the soldiers. They used to give me American chewing gum. When we went to visit Dad at the restaurant, I have memory of cigar smoke because they gave Dad big boxes of Havana cigars, and they all smoked cigars in the restaurant. And we went in, and there was this smoky atmosphere, and they used to give me empty cigar boxes full of chewing gum and sweets and chocolates and things, and I remember that very well.
And then you went in 1946, you said that was when
The war
did
ended.
your parents decide that was the time to go and get your brother?
They wanted to go, and my father made arrangements with his brother, who was one of the people who had left Glasgow at the time, at the beginning of the war. He was to come back and look after the restaurant for a couple of years, so Dad could go and have a rest, go to Cyprus and see to his land and to his house. And
Was that the first time he returned?
the first time I went to Cyprus, yes.
Was it the first time he went?
The first time he went back since the war, yes. And we all went. And we went by the boat that I told you.
And how long did you spend in Cyprus then?
We spent 4.5 years, and I went to junior school.
And can you remember the time when you first saw your brother?
Yes, that's a very moving scene, and I hope I can tell it you without getting emotional. The boat arrived in Famagusta, and it was the only port that the boats could actually go next to the land. In Limassol and Larnaca, the boat had to park outside, and then people had to get on a smaller boat and go inland. Anyway, in Famagusta, there was my brother standing. Sorry. And Mum went. She was very emotional. Sorry, Rulna?
Sorry, it's just the dog's making a lot of noise. You can see what's not again, sorry.
Mum saw him. And Dad asked the captain if he could come up before we were allowed to go down, and he let him come up. And it was very emotional time.
Did you give him a big hug, or?
He picked me up because he was nearly 10 years older than me, and he was a teenager, and he just picked me up in the air, and I thought, isn't it nice, this nice young man, you know? It was really an exciting time.
And then what did you do?
Well, the car, I don't know where the car was hired from, but it had to go all the way to Gadodris, so it must have took the whole day. We must have arrived very early in the morning, and
Did you talk a lot in the car? Was it a car? Or?
it was like a mini bus or something, because relatives, no, it was just Nick, my brother, and my parents. And I remember the scenery, because from Famagusta to Larnaca, it's all flat land. But when you leave Larnaca halfway to Gadodris, then you start going up the hill. You'll see that when you go. You start going up the hill, and I loved it. It was as if I knew I was going somewhere magic. It was really good.
Did you chat a lot with your brother? Did you talk a lot?
Yes, and my mother was on about her sisters. She had 2 sisters, younger than her. And we talk, and my brother was teasing me because I was a little girl to him, you know. And when we arrived, I saw Gadodris for the first time, and that was magical, because it's sort of in the side of the valley, and it was so small and clean and white. It really was nice.
I feel like you returned home.
And we arrived and stopped at the edge of the village where that platanos, the painting I've done, was still a big tree, because it was planted in 1906. So in 46 it was 40 years old, so it was a tree, a full-size tree, and there was a little cafe there and a parking place. So my parents said to the driver, we want us to get out here, and you can take the suitcases. You know, I think my brother might have gone with him to show him where to go. And we walked to our house from there, which was the slow pace we went with all the villagers behind us. It must have been about 15, 20 minutes before we got to our house.
Holding everything.
No, we left them in the car, and the driver took them. And an army of people behind us, excitements. The family was down there anyway to greet us. And I remember my mum seeing her younger sister, who in the meantime had 4 children. And my mum said, that's one of my sisters, but I don't remember which one it is. Yeah.
So you're like celebrities come home?
Yes. Can we have a stop so I can get a hanky,
Of course
please?
you can,
Yeah.
If they can check the video as well.
Yeah. Rulla.
All gone. It's okay.
They've all
Have a minute.
disappeared. I'll just.
Want me to get you something?
Uh,
Get some water as well.
all right, I'll have a sip of water.
One's gone.
It's going to be a very long one. You have to really edit it, won't you?
Don't worry about that.
No. I have this kitchen roll somewhere Marina has. Is it behind you? That's it. Thank you.
Some water. Yes.
I died 4 years ago.
Was he in Birmingham?
Yes. I mean, he would have been 88 now, or nearly 88.
Oh, so there was 10 years between them?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Did they only want 2 children, or
Sorry?
did your parents only want 2 children? Or?
My mother never wanted any after my brother for some reason. I don't think she liked the responsibility.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I found a picture. We found Maureen Fanny has a photo album upstairs. We've got loads of pictures, and we've got one of you at Greenmore College.
I've seen it as I
Have you
went
just been
in
talking
there.
about Greenmore College?
No,
Yeah,
no.
We've
I'm
got
only,
photos.
Rulamo, I'm only 6 there.
Brilliant. She's got such a good
She
memory.
is. She's a good
Do the whole
interviewer, isn't
documentary,
she?
you
You
Mum.
could.
I wish I was calmer.
No, it's really good. Is the camera back on now then?
I don't know, sorry. Parent boys.
Is the camera back on now?
Okay.
You know, when I open and close the door quietly, it doesn't interfere, does it?
I'll put this on the.
We'll probably jump around a bit, but I just want to ask you what your memories are of Famagusta. Do you, because it was the place where all the rich and famous went, wasn't it?
Yes, but that was after I got married. Do you want to hear
That was a
about
bit
that
later. No, let's
first?
go back then. So just carry on where you were with You
going
just
to
got
the
back together,
house.
yeah.
We'll have this entourage behind us, and people now have reminded me of childish comments I made. I saw some bitharka in the road near a house, and I said, hasn't Cyprus got some lovely huge vases? And everybody killed themselves laughing. And I've been reminded from time to time by people who were older than me, like Stella that you saw in Coventry, of things I'd said at the time. Anyway, we got to the house and it was very emotional and everything. And
Was there a language barrier between you and your brother, or did you always speak Greek when you were...
I never knew English. My mother sent me to a nursery kind of thing. Must have lasted only a few weeks because it was so near our home. I used to run out and try and get back home. There was no traffic at that time, so I could even cross the road and go. So they didn't pursue it.
So it was all Greek that you knew?
It was all Greek, and I had no children, and I never missed not having children. I didn't realise it was such fun having children until I got to Cyprus, and all my cousins, my mother's younger sister with the 4 children, they're the cousins I'm closest to. Her eldest son is the same age as me, and then the other 3 are in stages younger.
And these are people you would never have grown up with if you didn't
I
go
never
back.
grew up, but when we went to school together with Costa's same class and all that, it was this comradeship, you know. And so those years in the Δημοτικό, I really grew fond of Gadodris and of Cyprus. And also, I'm very grateful for my Greek because I was and always have been a reader. And I read a lot more and novels at a young age. So that's kept my Greek solid.
So you had a great childhood in terms of schooling in Gadodri?
In Gadodri, yes.
Did your brother go to the same school?
Yes, but he was in Gymnasio at that time. Yes, he was in Gerinia. Yeah.
So that's the side that was taken over as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the side that's
so you were
been...
close to the border there?
No, we're not. Gadodris is in the Larnaca area. I think my brother first went to the gymnasium in Nicosia, but when he finished the 4th class, they didn't pass him on to the 5th one. And that asked that the other gymnasia, and the one in Gerinia accepted him to go to the 5th class.
Did he live there then? Because it's far, isn't it?
No, he lived in, what is it you call when children go?
A boarding school?
A boarding. All the gymnasia had boarding schools because lots of villages went to them.
So did you know that you were staying in Cyprus then for a few years?
I had no idea. I had no idea. My father stayed with us for 2 years and then came back to the business, which was ailing because he lost the Americans, they'd gone back home. Plus it was being run by his brother who had no experience in catering business. And so he had to come back.
So when did you hear that you had to come back with your family?
My mum was waiting for my brother to finish the gymnasio so he could see what he would study because they thought he was going to study. But at the end of the day, he went in business. So for me, at the 4th class, I was just taken away. And the teacher said to my mum, "You're committing a crime."
So it's how good a student you were.
I was his favorite, but I think it was because I loved reading and, you know, things like that.
And was that quite unusual for women to be encouraged to read?
But I wasn't encouraged. I used to just get my mum's novels. My mum read novels, and I used to just get them and read them when she went to siesta at lunchtime. I never slept. And
what about your teachers? Did they encourage you to go to do well in school, to have a career, or did they just accept you
Well,
to get
that's-
married?
no, the teacher was all right because he thought that I should finish the gymnasio and then go to Greece and study Greek literature. But no, parents know.
What was it like saying goodbye to your friends?
It was sad, and in fact, the first year I was in England, I was begging and begging to send me back to my auntie, but they wouldn't. So it was the idea I would go to school there until it was time to finish, and then when I was old enough to get married, that's how it is in our culture. Well, it was. Luckily now maybe it's not so.
So how old were you when you returned to Birmingham? And how did you come by boat again? Or
We came by boat, yes. We came by boat.
how old were you?
The Messapia.
Well, you came on the Messapia.
Yeah, did your family come on the
I've been
Messapia?
reading about it.
Ah,
Yeah.
the Messapia, yes.
Lots of people came on.
Yes,
Didn't
and it was a lovely trip because it was Cyprus to Venice, and then staying overnight in a hotel in Venice, and then the train to Paris. It's what they call the Orient Express. So it was fun. And then there was always young people to make friends with on the boat.
Was it just you, your mother and brother?
Yes, yes, my father was already here.
How old were you then?
11, nearly 11 actually, because I went to school. They put me in junior school, and then after Christmas, because I'd reached my 11th birthday, I was put in senior. I couldn't speak a word of English, but I was maths, which wasn't my favorite subject, because it was the only thing I understood, because it was numbers. I became good at it.
And just tell me a little bit about the Messapia. There were a lot of people on there that were coming to England for the first time.
Yes, yes.
And did they have, I mean, it's hard for you, but do you remember any stories of, were they worried, were they scared, were they excited?
At that time, I don't remember, but other trips that I had a holiday in Cyprus with my dad and back when I was 14, I did meet other teenagers which were asking me a lot, say, is it as lovely as Famagusta, this girl said to me. And I didn't have the heart to say that it was nothing like Famagusta. So I can imagine how they felt, because when we arrived back, that picked us up and took us to a little hotel. We stayed the night and then drove back to Birmingham. And I remember it was raining, passing through London to go to this little, bed and breakfast place. And it just looked so dark and dismal after having the 5 years in Cyprus.
And then you just next day back to school and
Yeah.
back to life in Birmingham.
Back to life.
What was that like for you? You must have been quite a strong child to be able to deal with all
Yes.
that.
The one good thing that I remember well, because my father loved the cinema, he would take me very often, and I just lived for going to the pictures. It was the days of the glamour of Hollywood, and it was wonderful.
And you had stars come to Birmingham to the restaurant, didn't you?
Yes, but that was when I was a child. We had Mickey Rooney, I don't know if you've heard of him. He came with the GIs to the restaurant. But our restaurant was very near the Birmingham Hippodrome. So in the later years, when I was a teenager, we used to get stars from the theatre come.
And you had one story about Cliff Richard, I hear.
Ah, Cliff Richard, that wouldn't let them come in. Rula told you.
So what happened? He came to the restaurant one night.
They knocked on the door because that 11 o'clock, they keep... And 11:05, poor people, they finished the show, got dressed to come and have something to eat. That was adamant, and I was saying, Dad, it's Cliff Richard, please. So...
Sorry, can I just interrupt and get you to say Cliff Richard and the Shadows, because I think it's in your question, but you haven't got her saying it in full.
Cliff
Yes,
Richard
yes.
and the
Yes.
Shadows, yes.
Just go back to that then.
Fine.
Describe that night, what happened. There was a knock on the door. Tell me about the knock on the door.
Yeah, we saw people outside, and I looked, and it was Cliff Richard and the Shadows there. And I said, Dad, let's open. It's only 2 minutes past 11. No, he didn't open. Then we saw them go to the Chinese across the road, because by that time Chinese restaurants had started. They went there, and every night I used to see them come and go to the Chinese restaurant. I was really, really cross about it.
Oh gosh, what a story. When after growing up, then what was was your kind of days like? When did you start working in the restaurant? Or did you
Yeah.
work in the restaurant, or did you go just go on with the school life?
No, it was only up to 16, the school life. Up to 15, and then instead of my carrying on with my O levels and whatever, they transferred me onto the commercial class, which was shorthand and typewriting, because they thought that was very nice for girls, and I hated it. And a year later, I left, and I found a job when I first left in the chemist, which was further down the road from us. And I worked there for about a year, and then my brother got into the grocery business, and they took me away to work with my brother. And after that, I got married. I didn't have any exciting jobs at that time.
What did you feel your destiny was in terms of, did you want a career? What career did you want?
Well, if to be honest, if I wanted a career, it would have been to do with movies. I would have liked to be like they talk about the movies and give your opinions of them and all that, which I knew it wasn't possible, so I didn't even think about it. I'm quite positive, and I close out of my mind things that I think might be impossible. And I concentrate that when we go to Cyprus, that we're going to find somebody and I'll get married. And that's how it is. I mean, I don't know, you should know about that, I suppose.
Well, what did your parents say to you? Did they say you get married at this age, or did they give you
Yeah, they said, well, when after 16, then it was any time. I was lucky to stay till I was 17.
So then how did you meet your husband?
It was already, the families had, Dino's older sister was married to my one cousin. Not the cousin I mentioned, this cousin was older than me, he was near the age of my brother. And he and his wife met in Athens when they were both at university doing Greek literature, what I wanted to do. And they met and fell in love, went back, they married secretly and went to Cyprus and told them they wanted to get engaged. So her father, after they persuaded him, gave them a lovely engagement party. And it was the year I went with my father for a holiday. And that was the first time I saw Famagusta since the time we had arrived when I was a child. I hadn't seen Famagusta before.
And what year was that? So was that before 74?
Oh, yes. Yes, we married 1959.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Yes.
So tell me about Famagusta then.
Beautiful. Had the beautiful beaches and everything, and it was a modern city, because I think it became a city since the 40s. It wasn't a city like Larnaca and like Nicosia, which were there forever. It was a new city. It was a little village by the sea, and the port made it become a city.
And it was very glamorous, was it?
It was very glamorous, yes. The cafes were a lovely place to be.
And the hotels, did you see the hotels at the time started to go up? The big hotels?
Luckily, it was just before, because the big tall hotels had spoiled the line, the shoreline. I don't know if you've seen any pictures of them. If you went to Famagusta to go swimming at 4 in the afternoon, you were in the sea and the shadows of the hotels came over you. So they had actually spoiled Famagusta, in my opinion.
So you remember the raw Famagusta?
Yes, with the small, quaint hotels. But the cafes inland, they were beautiful. And all the inn people went, and it felt really good. And
your husband was from Famagusta?
Yes, he was born there.
So then how did you meet, and how did you end up coming back to Birmingham?
Because my father, Dino was studying to become an accountant, and the idea was that he would come here and continue and finish and then go back to Cyprus. And my father bought this piece of land, and we got married and we came here. But while we were here, and we went a couple of times on holiday, time went on, the invasion happened, and so we were here and we stayed.
Did you get married in Cyprus?
Yes,
Tell
in
me
the
a little bit about your wedding day.
wedding day. It was a typical.
Lots of the traditions. Did
Y-
you?
Yeah, we had a 2-day. We had a Saturday night party and a Sunday, but we went away on honeymoon on the Monday.
You got a honeymoon.
Yeah, we went to Nicosia. That wasn't very good because the hotel didn't book a room for us and they put us in a terrible place. We booked it a month before. We should have booked it the night before, the day before.
And so, how long did you know your husband? It wasn't like Proxenia like we call now.
It was like Proxenia because they came to see me. When we arrived in Cyprus, it was nearly Easter time. And on Easter Monday, they didn't tell my family that they were coming up. So I went with friends to Agios Minas, which is the monastery near our village, and there was a little river there. And we went and had souvla there. And when we arrived late at night, my mother said, "You went away for the day, and this young man came with his family to see you," and all that, and I was in trouble. Well, if they didn't tell us they were coming, so...
So then did he come back again?
Huh?
He came back again?
They came to Nicosia. We were at my auntie's house, and the whole family arrived one Sunday. And that was that. It was, the appearance seemed to be okay for both of us.
Good start.
Yeah.
And you came back to England and started your life. Describe hearing about the 74 invasion and what did you see on television? What did you read? What was your perspective about what was going on back home?
Yes, at the time it was. Can I just say I had both children
We'll talk through that then as well. Yeah.
and at the time the girls were old enough for me to have a part-time job, and I went to somebody helped me find a job at the bookshop at the university, Hudson's. It was Hudson's, called Hudson's at the time, and
Let's go back then to when you had children, so we don't jump
all
forward.
right.
Also, you missed that whole sweet shop years, so that might come into it.
How old
there.
was you into the
So,
sweet shop?
so before, obviously, you've got the whole sweet shop thing. So when you had the sweet shop in the mid-60s, didn't you?
Yes, my brother bought a business in Her Street near the Hippodrome, the corner sweet shop, and he asked me to work for him. It was his shop, asked me to work for him, but then
Was that not long after you got married?
No.
No, Marina was
At the
3.
timeline.
Marina was 3 at the time. Rula was at school.
So
Marina
we
was.
moved at the restaurant. I think in terms of the timeline, so the restaurant was then closed. My granddad died. The restaurant was
Demolished.
closed and demolished for the inner ring road development.
Okay. What year did your grandfather die?
So 1960 was Marina not born?
61.
61 he died.
Mm.
And then my
The restaurant closed, then your father died. Yeah.
No, my father died in 61.
And the restaurant.
And the restaurant went until 63.
Really?
And
So who ran the restaurant then?
Mum, me, Dino,
Yeah,
we lived upstairs. As Rula told you, we lived upstairs where Marina was born.
So Marina was born as well after he died. So in that period of the last 2 or 3 years, then obviously the council decided to do the ring road and demolish it. And so.
Right, can you describe that bit then? If we start.
Yeah, and then you moved back to your first house in Clinton Road, didn't you?
Okay, so that's a bit nicely. So if you just go back to the time where
My
your
father died.
Yeah, that was
Yes.
a difficult time for you. Anyway.
It was very difficult. My mum was in pieces. She was in pieces. She couldn't do anything. And I had Rula, and Rula was very upset as a toddler because her grandmother was wailing and crying every single day for the next couple of months. So it was a difficult time, and I was doing my thing in the restaurant. But we had good staff. We had waitresses, we had chefs. It was a well-organized place. And it was, I was happy there. I was happy living there. Anyway,
Just say, because we haven't said, Mum hasn't actually said my my father died. So you
Yeah,
would
that's what I'm
say-
trying to get. I don't want to interrupt her all the time.
Sorry,
No, it's
I
all right.
won't interrupt again.
No, no.
So yeah, maybe if
Just as much.
Have I moved it? Sorry.
I'm just trying not to speak too much. In
I'm
my...
sorry.
No, it's good for you to keep doing it.
It reminds me because I
Yeah, no,
forget.
that's right.
I should have written the timeline down for you.
We'll do that anyway, because I've got to write the whole piece on the book anyway, to
You
be
might have a
honest.
bit of voice over.
Yeah.
I'll shut up now.
Sorry. Where was the last thing I said which was relevant to you?
So I want you to tell me, basically say the words, my father died, and then this is what we had to do.
Yes. My father died of a stroke, 1961. So we had to carry on. My mother was in pieces, and for the first couple of months she couldn't be of any use or any help to anybody. But eventually, she was okay. So I was doing the managing in the restaurant, and Dino was working as an accountant. And we stayed till 1963 when there was a redevelopment in that area, and we were told that we had to move out. They didn't come to Dino and my brother didn't come to an agreement with the council because they wouldn't offer us anything. They were obliged to offer us something for taking the business away, but they wouldn't offer us anything equivalent to that. So my brother moved in on the business side and got a fish and chip shop for my mother to work. We didn't want to have anything to do with the fish and chip shop because Dino was working as an accountant. And we moved they gave us a council house. So Dino and I moved into the council house before the restaurant was demolished. My mum stayed there a little while. And then we bought the house in Pershore Road for Mum to stay there. I don't remember whom we bought it from. It might have been from Stella.
This was the house where all the lace...
Yes. So my mum moved into that house, and we had our own council house for a few years until we bought our own house. After that was after the restaurant.
And you missed out the bit you had Marina in the...
Yes, Marina was born a year after that died. 61? No, 2. Yeah, 62. She was born May 62. That died April 61. And so I had Marina, and we moved into the council house when she was a baby, a year old or something like that. And I spent the next, now I'm trying to remember, I spent the next couple of years just looking after the children. And then, I can't remember the year, my brother bought this sweet shop next to the Birmingham Hippodrome, and he wanted me to run it for him, but we came to an agreement, and I had it as my own. I paid him rent as the landlord. And I worked there a few years, but the first 2 were difficult because Marina was 3. And I took her with me, and I had her with me all day while I was working. But we managed. A sweet shop was, I used to give her crisps.
But the kids loved having a sweet shop.
Yes. We didn't have these sort of diet things for children at that time. And time came, she went to school, and I worked another couple of years, 3 years, I can't remember now.
Did your kids face any difficulty at school, or did the sweet shop help? What was that like?
They were the envy of all their cousins because they went to Greek school every Saturday, and my nieces and nephew said to their father, "Don't come to pick us up. My Thea will pick us up, and we'll go to the sweet shop, and you can pick us up from the sweet shop." Michael, my nephew, will say to you now, his idea of heaven was that he should be locked up in the sweet shop for a night.
And it was a successful shop.
It was, but I got tired of it. It's not a job that gets you, it gives you any pleasure. Although we had the customers from the Hippodrome, we had Mike and Bernie Winters, we had the comedians, I'm trying to think, the ones that came on television with lots of guests each week. They had miserable faces, but they were the biggest, most successful comedians.
Not Morecambe and Wise.
Morecambe and
Oh,
Wise.
yes, Morecambe and Wise.
Yes.
Okay, so that bit again then. We had comedians.
We had comedians. We had Morecambe and Wise. We had Mike and Bernie Winters. We had a season of Cinderella, and we had Dennis Lottis, a singer who turned out to be a Greek from South Africa. So he was always there talking to us. And so we made sort of friends with that crowd. But eventually I wanted out, and there were about 5 years lease left, and I sold those 5 years lease to someone else. And I was out for a very little while. And then somebody said there was a part-time job at the Birmingham University bookshop. So I thought, that's it. I can have a part-time job, I can be with my children. And after that, it was a book-selling career for the rest of my life. 20 years I've spent in the book-selling trade.
Yes, I read the article that was done. I guess finally you've got a career that you've taken pleasure out of.
I took an absolute, I never thought that I'd have this luck. And then being there, meeting all sorts of people, somehow the idea of art came into my head because I was always in the art books. I mean, literature books I read once I liked, but art books, I was looking at art all the time, and that's when I wanted to paint. So I did have a good career.
Did you do a course, or how did you just start painting?
I went to the MAC. And I still go from time to time. If I feel I've gone stale, I book a term. I'm booking for January again. I go to an advanced class now, but when you're working with other people that are doing the same thing as you, you pick strength from each other and you enjoy yourself.
So when did you start? Tell us about some of the paintings that you reminded you of home and Gadodri. When did you start painting those, and when did you get your inspiration from your trips?
Yes, and I didn't see any paintings of Gadodris. It was after I started doing all sorts of things. I started off with vases of flowers and things like that, but when I went to Gadodris, after I was painting, I thought, and the light there is just unbelievable. If you're painting or if you're reading a book, the light in Cyprus is just... Even when I first started wearing glasses, I could read my book without glasses in the Avli in Gadodris because of the light.
And then how did you feel about, I guess your girls were growing up by this point.
Yes.
And did you encourage them to have their own careers, to not have, not saying any mistakes that you have, any regrets that you had? Tell us about how you felt about having daughters in what is quite a male-dominated kind of culture.
Yes. Well, I knew from the beginning that I was not going to restrict, even if they wanted to have a person that wasn't Cypriot as chosen husband, that I was determined, and I knew that I could persuade Dino there wouldn't be a big problem, because he is quite open in some things. So I feel that I wasn't, a difficult mother in this respect. Obviously, with parents, children always have some, some things that the parents have done wrong. So I can't say 100% that I'm right. But my relationship with the girls has been strong.
And was their father...
Interrupt there though. You need to say that you let me go to university. I was probably the very first person ever to
Yeah, she was followed by a lot of the people we
and
know.
a lot of people were saying to you, you shouldn't really let her...
Did you face criticism?
Yes, because they said if she goes to university, she's got to go to Birmingham.
So tell her...
Just say like my first daughter went.
Yeah, so explain that your daughter was one of the first to go to university in the Greek community.
Yes. Well, as the children grew up, shall I start like
Yes.
this? As the children grew up, I knew that I wanted them to go to university if they wanted the same thing, which I was confident they did because they were both very bright at school. And Rulla was the first one. She, after grammar school, she applied for university, and she did languages. Again, I don't know, I think maybe my influence because I liked languages, I liked literature. So
And was that quite unheard of in the Greek community for someone to let a daughter go away to university?
away to university, yes. All the people who had daughters a bit younger, they followed because they must have argued with their parents, and eventually now it's quite common.
So it was a quite proud moment.
Yes, yes.
Do you remember anyone saying anything particularly difficult to you about you letting her go? Or?
Oh yes, I had comments, but it didn't worry me. It didn't even upset me.
Maybe just say, I had comments about people not wanting my daughter to.
People had something to say about it.
About it, people had.
So start again.
And also that I went away from home, make it clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it a university? Brighton University.
East Sussex, Sussex University, yes.
Okay, so start from the beginning. She told me she wanted to go to East Sussex, and people said, Brighton.
When we decided that Rulla, was going to go to university, even though the community looked down on us for doing that, because I think a lot of people were afraid of this business of if one does it, the others are going to follow, their own daughters will follow. But Rulla went with our blessing, and she decided to go to East Sussex, which made it more fearful that she was too far away. But as it happened, Rulla, the first term, she came home every month. Because she was very young. She's born in July, and she was one of the youngest to go. And she came home every month for the first term, and then after that, it was normal.
Then more people started going to university.
More people from the Greek community started going. Families who had daughters, they all went.
Were you quite involved in the Greek community at all, or was it just through family?
I was involved a little bit, but I've never been part of the group of the church. But I mean, we always went, to church. Not every Sunday, but we've been in touch. Yeah.
And then, like you said, you didn't want them to marry anyone particular. You just let them make their own decision.
Yes.
So just tell me a bit about that. You wanted your daughters to make their own decision.
I wanted my daughters to make their own decision. Yes. I think if you make your own decision, if you made a mistake, it's your own mistake. If your parents bring you up more freely, you can have a more sound mind because you're making decisions about smaller things. So your brain works a little bit more.
Well, this book that we're writing is a lot based on focusing on women and women telling their stories, because often they're overshadowed by the men's stories. It's not a competition, but what, in your opinion, because you've lived such a great life, but you've seen many different generations.
Yes.
Are you pleased with how things have evolved? And
I am. I'm pleased now when I go to church and I see children of all colours coming to communion. It's great. Our church is opening now. So I'm pleased about that.
And the different jobs that people have taken.
And the different jobs as well, yes.
Tell me then, what year did Rulla go to university in? What was that?
77.
So that was just after the war. So now can we go back a couple of years to when the invasion happened?
And in Cyprus. Yes, I wanted to tell you about that.
I want to hear what you...
Yes.
When's the time you went just before 74? When's the last time you went just before Von Augustus was taken?
72.
Okay,
It was
so
the greatest holiday the girls had had.
are we okay?
Yeah, I just want to just readjust that mic again.
Yeah.
It's just,
Oh
sorry, I
dear,
think-
I'm
yeah.
too fidgety.
Yeah, sometimes you're touching your neck. I
Oh,
think it's just
I
readjust.
keep my arms
No.
down, sorry.
No, don't worry, don't worry,
Oh.
don't worry.
Some great stuff. You went in 72.
We went in
So
72,
in a minute,
yes.
to describe that time in 72. If there was there anything unsettling about that year? Or?
We never realized if there was. There may have been, because we heard afterwards that there was a lot of intimidation, political intimidation between the Greek parties, and also the Turks from Turkey had bombed Cyprus a couple of times when there was the Greek, one group of Greek Cypriots intimidated the Turks when there was a minority in the village. And then soon after that, we'd get bombs in a part of Cyprus from Turkey. At one time, there were napalm bombs, which burned forests. They threw napalm bombs. So we did know of that, but it never stopped us from doing what we were doing and going when we were going.
So what do you remember about hearing that there'd been an invasion?
Well, I got up in the morning to get ready to go to work at Hudson's, and it was on the news that Archbishop Macarius had been killed. The news said in English on the BBC, because I used to put the radio on at that time, and we were devastated. I think it hadn't got to Famagusta by that time, because all Dino's family were in Famagusta. And I went to work, and I was very angry because nobody showed any sympathy, and they started saying it's the Greeks' fault. And I was irate. I was really, really angry, and I was arguing with my colleagues and all that, and it upset me. And we spent a very upsetting period for the next 2 months, because then it moved to Famagusta, and we heard that Famagusta was evacuated. But there was no post, there was no telephones. We had no idea about Dino's family until 4 or 5 weeks later, when we received a letter from his father, which I've kept.
You still got that?
Yes, but I haven't thought to bring it with me now.
Find it and we'll get it another
All
time.
right, I'll give it to you.
What did
yeah.
the letter say?
It was like a historical, it was like said in a historical term. He had his wits, and he said, my son, on Tuesday, such and such date, we had to do that. On Wednesday, we had to do that. And they ended up at our house in Gadodris, because the house was there, it was empty. And they went up, and they asked my aunt, and she opened for them. And at that time, there were about 20-25 people living in the house, until months later, when one by one they found jobs in Limassol and things like that.
And I heard that people thought they were going to go home, didn't they?
Yes, that's why they went there. They said we'll be safe in Gadodris, waiting, but it never happened.
That day never came. Were they all okay, Dino's family?
They were okay, yeah, they were okay, but
Were you seeing much on the news?
yeah, it was on the news and in the papers. I mean, the Sun got the comment from a Greek Cypriot probably, and wrote a big heading saying barbarians. A big heading on the front page, the Sun wrote barbarians. And then on the news, the next evening, it said that the Turks were not hurt ever as much as that title they saw in an English newspaper, barbarians.
So,
Can I make
Yeah.
a suggestion? You know, when you talk about Dad's family, when you said about did they think they were going back, it might be nice to say, you know, they left
thought
their houses
with nothing,
just
yeah.
with their flip-flops and their summer dresses.
Yes, I'm
thinking
sorry.
they'd go back.
No,
it's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Just to make it more clear. And
Yes.
so I'm
You
not
know,
talking.
yeah, no, and then just all
Because I
this
heard
stuff.
that people left sewing on the tables and
Yes.
Sewing, they left their sewing on the
They went with without anything, summer clothes, and then the people who were unlucky and didn't have houses to go to and went on camps. That was real misery. Open camps with people with the summer clothes they were wearing, no change of underwear, no nothing.
So was Dino, is it his father you said? Did he work there? How did he?
His father was retired at that time, but he had 4 sisters with husbands, with children, and they all, even the sister who lived in Nicosia, her house was near the borders of Nicosia, of the 2 parts of Nicosia, so she left as well and she went to Kadodris too.
And does the letter describe any of what they had, what money they had? Did they have anything? Can you remember?
They had nothing. I don't know about money. You see, if people had money in the bank, I would imagine the Bank of Cyprus would, at the time, would have honoured what they had, and so they weren't destitute. Our family, I don't know about other families, our family were not destitute, I don't think. But like, you live, like your clothes, jewelry, Dino's older sister was the only one who was wearing 6 gold bangles, and she was wearing them all the time, and she had them on. And she was the only one who had anything of any value that had taken with her. But no clothes, no clothes or change of underwear or anything like that.
And did...
Is it worth talking about Dad's sister who wrote poetry about it?
Oh, yes. Dino's the one sister who is a little older than Dino. She's the youngest of the 4 sisters, but she's older than Dino. She was a lecturer at the college at Gymnasio, and so was her husband. That was the cousin, the 2 people who fell in love and got married. And they were both lecturers in college in Yalousa in Cyprus, which is the point by Apostolos Andreas. And they were very political. In fact, he was in Eoka at the time. And Clary started writing poetry, and she wrote loads of poems about the invasion and mainly losing her home and the Lemonniers. What else can I tell you about it? I don't know much about other people except what I read in the papers, but I think even if you lose only your belongings, it's a big thing to start all over again. But also, Clary's husband, Nikos, my cousin, he adored his books and his bookcase and photographs. And out of all the things that they'd lost, he cried for that. So it's part of your life gone.
Things you can never get back.
No. I mean, clothes you can buy again when you're better off.
When they realised that they weren't going to go home, did they stay in Gadol?
They all left one by one. Yes, Clary was asked to go to Limassol because there was a place there for her to teach, and she had a brilliant career afterwards, because from teaching she went into politics, and in the Gliridis government she was a minister of education. So she is still alive. She's the only one of Dino's sisters who is still alive.
And how does Dino feel now about the home that he's left behind, that is still a ghost town now, isn't it?
We went, and the way we saw it, we don't want to go again.
What was it like going back?
Yeah, it wasn't anything we wanted to see. It wasn't a town with a spirit or a heart in it. It didn't have anything.
What can you see? Because how close did you get to?
We went into the hotel. We drove in through the border from the Vigella area. I think there was an opening from that area, and we drove, and we went, found Famagusta. We didn't recognize it. We got lost, but we managed to get to the sea road, and there was one hotel open at that time because it was a few years ago. And we went into the hotel. We used the facilities and left.
How did Dino feel about?
He didn't want to stay. We drove round and round to find his house, and we got lost, and we kept asking and asking, and when we finally got to the road, we couldn't recognize it. I don't know why.
Was it all overgrown, or?
It just looked different. Maybe it was what was in our hearts, and there was no love for it. There was no nostalgia or love, even for Dino, who grew up there.
And was there much Turkish army around?
No, we didn't see Turkish army. We had one frightening experience. When we were coming back to Larnaca, there was no other cars on the road. It was completely isolated. And we were just passing one place, and we didn't know which road to take out of a roundabout. And we saw a soldier in uniform, and he waved to us. And we stopped, and he said, "Can you give me a lift to such and such village?" I don't remember which village he said. And we said yes, and we had him in the back of the car. I was very uneasy until we took him where he directed us to go, and I said to him, "Where we are going, will it be easy for us to go to the border?" He said, yes, I will show you how to get there. And we drove a long way, so he did take us a long way out of our way. And then we dropped him off, and he told us which road to go to.
So you couldn't wait to get back to the...
Yes, yeah. We didn't eat, we didn't drink. We came back to Larnaca and went straight to Miligis in Larnaca.
What year was that? How long ago after?
I'm trying to remember.
Was that quite recent, did you say?
Not very recent, no.
Did you take the girls with you?
No, it was just us two. It was when we had... Rula, do you know when we had the Gadodris house? When we had the Gadodris house.
What do you mean?
When we inherited the Gadodris house, and we did... When it was livable.
I've no idea, Mum.
Would it...
But it was a good few years after 74.
Yes, it was in the 90s, I think.
And what did you, because obviously you were in Birmingham, and then there was a lot of people that came, not lots, but people like my mother who was a refugee. Did you remember many people coming from Cyprus and starting a new life in Birmingham? And what was the Greek community like back then?
Oh, it was very small, and it suddenly went bigger. Yes, it was very small, and we knew everybody in church. Can't remember how many there were, but it suddenly just grew bigger.
And what kind of stories did you hear any stories about?
I didn't, no.
And then what about things like the produce and stuff that we got back in when you first came to Birmingham? The halloumi, things like that. It was hard to get, wasn't it? And then...
It was at the beginning. We had some friends in London, and they were my parents' friends since the World War. And they were from Vavla, which is the neighbouring village to Gadodris. And my parents and them were very great friends. It was a brother, a sister, and the sister's husband, and they had a little boy who was slightly younger than me. And when the bombing was a lot in London, they came and lived with us for a while. Yeah, so I don't know if you want to add that to the other section.
Yeah, it's okay. Don't worry
Yes.
about that. So tell me about home comforts. How did you get your home comforts at the beginning?
They had a place in London, in the West End, called the Hellenic Provision Stores, which I don't think exists there now. I think the Katsouris brothers took their clientele. And we used to go every so often to London and after the war as well, when I was a teenager, Dad would say, do you fancy going to London and we can have souvlaki, because there weren't any souvlaki in Birmingham. So we used to go, and we used to go to the Hellenic provision stores and get everything from there.
And then what happened later? People opened a few grocery places in Birmingham.
In Birmingham, yes. There was, by the university, you know Philippidis, the consul, his wife Betty and her parents were refugees from Egypt, and he opened a little grocery shop in Selly Oak, which was like the little roads between the university and Selly Oak, and we could find anything we wanted there. It was more convenient for us than Erdington.
And then how do you feel now with the fact that everywhere you go, the spec tells Is it quite nice that your culture is part of?
I am proud because I mean, so many other cultures have infiltrated, and I felt as if we didn't have anything to offer. And now people are onto Greek food quite a lot.
And do you enjoy cooking?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about kind of the things you like to make, and is that the part of the culture that you've probably retained the most?
Yes. The cooking that I like most is one dish that we did in Gatodris and Lefkara, which is called tavas lefkaritikos, and it's rice and lamb cooked together in a dish with onions, tomatoes and spices, and they cook together in a dish in the oven, and it's a lovely dish. And I haven't done it for a long time now. I'll have to again.
Why do you think you never went back to Cyprus to live?
I think after Dino finished and he got a practice of his own, it seemed as if our life got settled here. And in the meantime, our land was sold in Famagusta, and then Famagusta was gone, and we sort of never did.
Yeah.
But we have bought a holiday flat in Larnaca now, which we stay there as well as the house in Gatodri.
Do you ever visit the north?
No, the way things stand, I'm not particularly interested.
And how do you feel about the island and the way things are now? Do you think there'll ever be a Famagusta that's opened?
I'm not very hopeful, because the thing is with Erdogan's politics, I think we're better off as we are, rather than negotiate something when they keep taking something else away from you.
And how do you feel about your fellow Cypriots that have made lives across the world? You know, do you feel proud of?
I am, yes. The Cypriots are survivors, aren't they? Mm.
And what about, unless I've missed anything, Rula can help me here, but what, as a woman and the things that you've gone through in your life, why do you think you've been able to have you've had some really dark times?
Yes.
Why do you think that you've been able to kind of have the life that you've got?
I think it does depend on the character of a person, and I didn't realize until now, but I am a strong person. Mm.
And you've had a great family, and your talents have helped you get through that, do you think?
Yes. No, I've had a great family, but I hopefully it's the closeness was always between us. I don't know whether it's because they're both girls. I don't know.
And do you think that's one part of the culture, that the family element that?
Oh yes. The family element is good. It can be oppressive it can be oppressive when the old rules are being still applied to people in this modern age. You know, when you hear about some young woman now, if her parents are still of the same head as her parents were and all that, it's not right for young people being born and brought up here now.
How do you think Birmingham has changed, and how do you think did you encounter a racial element when you first grew up here, and how do you think that's changed now?
I think the racial element is always there. We may not be attacked, but there were times when something happened with Cyprus that we'd have phone calls. I don't know how they found that telephone, and we say, "You bloody Cypriots, get out of here," and put it down. So, things like that happen. And something happened to Rula when she was a teenager, which upset me a lot. Her cousin Michael and his English girlfriend had gone out somewhere, and they were coming back to my house around 10 in the evening, 11 in the evening, something like that. And they got the bus from Selly Oak to get off at Harborne Park Road and walk. We lived in a small cul-de-sac off Harborne Park Road. And as soon as they got on the bus, there were a couple of hooligans there that they heard them talking in Greek to each other. I don't think they understood what language they were talking in, but they attacked them. And when they got off the bus, all three of them, and ran down the small cul-de-sac that we lived. But as soon as they got into the cul-de-sac, I don't think they followed them all the way down, because I heard Rula shouting and banging on the door, and I opened, and she blurred out what had happened, and I went, and it was just on the top of the road, these two chaps there.
Did that change your view on life in England? Or?
Life in England? Well, I hope it's isolated. I've had isolated incidents, like going to hospital, waiting in the waiting room with other people. And if somebody sitting next to you speaks to you, you speak back. A couple of times, one old lady, "And how long have you been in England?" And I said, "Well, most of my life. I grew up from before my teens." "Well, why do you still have an accent?" "Because it's me," I said to her. "That's how I am." "No, you shouldn't have an accent." "Well, is that prejudice or not?"
And do you think that's changed now, or do you think?
No, that was recently.
That was recent.
Within the last 10 years, and a nurse as well. A nurse from the Royal Orthopaedic Hospital.
Gosh.
Can you just say, is this the English while you're here when you moved?
This is recent.
Yeah. So it's the English people is obviously saying these racist.
Yes,
things.
English.
Can you just say the words when you move? Well, being here in England.
You have encountered
a lot of
if you
racism
can just say encountered a few isolated incidents.
in England.
Yes,
Yeah.
I did say it.
Yeah, I think you
I did
do.
it.
I already said isolated
Yeah.
incident. If you want to edit this out,
No,
it doesn't matter.
Very isolated
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
I mean, what might be interesting is when you were at school, when she said earlier on that when she went to school she couldn't speak any English at maths. She did well at maths, but you had some like racism, didn't you?
Yes.
Then.
From across the road, a kid would call me Blackie.